What's up everyone, welcome back to the channel and welcome to the 2020 BMW M2 Competition and the 2020 Toyota GR Supra. And in today's video we're gonna compare these two cars and see if the Supra is a match for the almighty BMW M2 Competition. And at this point you're probably wondering how come I'm comparing a full-on M car with a Toyota GR Supra, which is basically an M Performance BMW. Well, if you've watched my review of the Supra from a couple of months ago, you would have noticed that I said that the only problem I see with the Supra is the BMW Competition. And that problem is the fact that these two cars, as you see them spec'd right here, cost roughly the same in Sweden. And better still, if you get the M2 Competition with a manual transmission, the BMW is cheaper than the Toyota. And because I'm such a big fan of the Supra, I wanted to drive it back to back with the M2 Competition and see what's what. So let's start off with some specs. Both of these two cars have BMW inline 6-cylinder engines. The M2 has a twin-turbo S55 unit that's capable of producing 410 horsepower, while the Supra has a B58 single-turbo unit that can produce 370. And because of the weight difference between these two cars, they're pretty much just as fast to reach 100 km per hour from standstill, and both of them can reach that speed in around 4.2 seconds. The BMW M2, however, is fitted with a DCT double clutch transmission, while the Supra is fitted with an 8-speed single clutch torque converter automatic from ZF. Now, let me tell you some of the advantages that the M2 Competition has over the Supra. First off, this is a full-on M car, and that means that this car's suspension system, steering and rear wheel differential are all developed by the M division. This car is more hardcore and more focused than the Supra is. And beside all of that, the M2 is actually a 4-seater, 2-door coupe that can actually carry 4 adults with ease, not to mention the big boot it has. But what about the Supra? What does this car have over the M2 Competition? Well, first things first, this is a more classic take on a sports car. It has only 2 seats. As you can see, it's slicker, it's more low to the ground than the M2 Competition, and the entire car is actually lower than the BMW. Just look at how long the bonnet is and how further back the seats are in this car. Not to mention the very aggressive back end of the new Supra. I think it looks absolutely stunning, if you ask me. And if you've only seen one in the pictures and not in the flesh, you really need to hold on to your opinion until you see one in real life. Anyway, this car only has 2 seats, and as soon as you get inside, the driving position is much lower than in a BMW, and the whole cabin just wraps around you, and you just feel like this is more of a sports car than the M2 Competition. Of course, because of that and this car entire design language, it's gonna be less practical than the M2, and it's also got a smaller boot. And on top of that, the Supra is basically a 2-seater M240i. So it's more like an M Performance BMW than a full-on M car. On the inside, the M2 Competition has a regular 2 Series interior with some sporty bits here and there. You have possibly the best M steering wheel ever made in front of you, then there's some carbon bits on the dash and the center console, some Alcantara on the doors, and these quite awesome M seats, which are a much welcome addition to the M2 Competition. The Supra's interior features a lot of BMW parts, of course, since this is a joint effort between Toyota and BMW. But the Supra gets all the iDrive 7 goodies, while the BMW gets the old iDrive 6. The Toyota has new graphics for the infotainment system and a digital instrument cluster, which the M2 Competition doesn't have. There's also some carbon on the center console, and these almost bucket seats are not only gorgeous to look at, but they are very comfortable and they allow you to sit very low in the car. All in all, decent interiors, the M2's is the more practical one and the one that offers the most space inside, while the Supra's feels sportier because of the lower driving position and less spacious cabin. Everything inside seems to shrink around you. But enough of that, let's get to driving these two cars. Now, first things first, doesn't this car look gorgeous in this yellow paint job? It sure does turn a lot of heads on the street. I remember when I first drove a Supra, it was a black one. I did a review on it a few months ago. People barely noticed it on the street, but with this one, everybody sees it and everybody gives a thumbs up or at least a wow look on their face. It's crazy. Anyway, back to driving the new Supra. Driving position is spot on. You sit nice and low in these seats and everything from inside feels quite sporty. But not only does it feel sporty, this car, it actually is quite sporty. It's fast and it only takes 4.3 seconds to reach 100 km/h from standstill. And that's just 0.1 second slower than an M2 Competition, even though this car is 70 horsepower down on the BMW. How's that possible, you might ask? Well, the Supra is roughly 50 kilograms lighter than an M2 Competition equipped with an automatic transmission. And also, if you ask me, the Supra's numbers are quite conservative because in a straight line, this car definitely feels faster than an M2 Competition. But enough of that, that's not the point of these two cars, straight line speed, but handling is. And while I was quite positive when reviewing the Supra around 3 months ago, when driving this car back to back with an M2 Competition, some of its flaws start to pop up. First I jumped into the Competition, drove it hard on this very road, and finally I hopped in the Supra. And the first thing you notice is that the Toyota jumps around this quite bumpy road significantly more than the BMW, and that unsettles the car quite a lot and you immediately start to lose confidence to push it even harder. So what I'm trying to say is that this car feels remarkably similar to what my BMW M2 LCI felt. The second thing I noticed is the steering. And in my opinion, it's just too quick and you start to notice it immediately, especially in situations like this one when you're driving on a very bumpy road. Because the car moves around so much and the steering is so quick to react, every input you have on the steering wheel just makes the car even more unstable. Now again, these are not necessarily negatives about the Supra. They weren't very apparent when I drove this car by itself, but they stand out right away when you drive the Supra and the Competition back to back. Now, how about we talk about some of the things that the Supra has over the M2 Competition, shall we? Well, first off, it just sounds better than the M2 Competition. It really does. Have a listen. Supra come better equipped as standard than the M2 Competition, but it also has some options that you can't fit to the BMW, like adaptive cruise control, a head-up display, and the adaptive suspension system, just to name a few. And finally, this car gets the latest tech on the inside from BMW, while the Competition gets the older version. So there you go, those are the pros and cons of the new Toyota Supra. Now let's jump into the BMW and talk some more. So the M2 Competition, this is my personal car, so you might as well take that into account when you're digesting all the information I'm going to give you about it. This one is black, not my favorite M2 Competition color, but still, it looks pretty good. So right off the bat, let's start by talking about the driving position. And there's no going around this, the Supra is just better. In the M2 Competition, you feel like you're sitting on the car, while in the Toyota, you feel like you're sitting inside the car. The M2 Competition feels basically like a 2 Series, while the Supra feels more like a sports car. Everything inside seems to wrap around you. Everything feels snug, very sports car-like. You get what I'm saying? It's not, however, a big issue if you're planning to buy an M2 Competition, because you will get used to the driving position quite fast. And unless you're going to be driving Supras and Caymans very often, you're not going to see this as a negative. This car is equipped with an S55 twin-turbo unit. Yep, a proper M car, and it's the same engine that featured in the previous M3 and M4, and it's just fantastic. And my favorite thing about it is the power delivery. The Supra with its single turbo B58 engine feels more explosive when you floor it. Basically nothing happens until 3000 RPM, and then when you're past that, the turbo kicks in and off you go. The S55 in the M2 Competition has a more linear power delivery, and it almost feels like a naturally aspirated engine even when you're flooring it. There's power available all along the rev range, and it never really tops out even when you get close to the red line. The gearbox is an acquired taste, so to speak. It's not as smooth as the Supra ZF around town, but it is much faster when you're changing gears yourself. Same goes when you're in a kick-down situation. You floor the throttle, the gearbox immediately downshifts a couple of gears and off you go. And the single clutch ZF in the Supra just can't do that as fast as the M2 Competition's gearbox. Let me see what else. Well, there's less understeer in the M2 Competition when you're driving it hard. The steering is more precise than in the Supra, even though it's not as fast. And the BMW is just more configurable than the Toyota. You can customize basically everything in here. The steering, the engine response, the gearbox, the traction control, all have 3 settings that you can change individually. And furthermore, you have these M1 and M2 buttons on the steering wheel, and each of these 2 buttons can actually contain a preset of the settings I just mentioned before, and you can just switch between those 2 presets just by pressing a button without going through menus. And the Supra, on the other hand, only has normal and sport mode, and you can't really configure anything else. How come the Supra costs just as much as an M2 Competition, at least in Sweden or in Europe in general? Well, I have no official information about this, but if I had to guess, I would say that this is all down to how many cars Toyota can produce and how much is their production cost. The M2, for example, is based on a regular 2 Series. It has the same headlights, taillights, interior beats, and so on, you get to drill. But it's also based on the previous M4, from which it gets its rear differential, the steering, the suspension system, and so on. So what I'm trying to say is that because BMW used bits from here and there, it needed less time to develop this car. On the other hand, the Supra Z4 project is a different story because they had to start from scratch, and that required much more development time. So, conclusion time. Well, I have to be honest and say that I really do enjoy both cars quite a lot. I don't really get the hate around the Supra, like I said in my previous video. I would take a BMW Supra any day of the week instead of Toyota just cancelling it and making another SUV. But anyway, if you're like me and you have a family and you want a sports car as your only car and you want to be able to daily drive it and take it on longer journeys, then the M2 Competition is the obvious choice. But if you don't have a family and you don't need the extra practicality and the extra space that the M2 offers, then you might as well also pick the M2 Competition. It's just the better car out of these two. It's a no-brainer to buy the M2 Competition when it costs the same as a Toyota Supra. But that's been it for today's video, my friends. I really hope you've enjoyed it. Please give it a thumbs up if you have, and make sure you're subscribed for plenty more videos to come. And until next time, take good care of yourselves, and I'll see you around.